Hi and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Jimmy McIntyre. A few months ago, a Nikon representative contacted me about testing out a prototype for their 14 to 30 f4 lens for the Z system, which I think is coming out in spring 2019. I'm a Nikon user and have been for a long time, but I'm still a dinosaur in the sense that I still use a D800. I was going to upgrade to the D850, but then I heard about this mirrorless system. And when Nikon contacted me, I'd already been doing some research about the Z7. So I'm aware of its cons and pros as other people have expressed on the internet. Naturally, I was very happy to take up this project, and it wasn't just about me taking some photos and testing out the lens. They gave it to me for 3 weeks and asked me to visit a few different locations, so some places in Spain like Madrid and Toledo, the northeast of England, Newcastle, and also Dubai. And they wanted a collection of shots that they could use as promotional images to show what the lens is capable of. Now, before I begin, I just want to cut to the chase so you don't have to watch the entire video. My thoughts on the Z system in general was that it was fantastic. Really light, easy to use coming from a Nikon user. I was very happy with the whole performance, and I would definitely upgrade from my D800 to that. In terms of the lens, I thought the lens was absolutely superb. Sharp throughout, but I'm going to go into more detail and show some examples. And just a great little lens, which felt like it was real quality, you know. It was made out of plastic rather than metal, but it didn't detract from the quality of the lens. I would definitely replace my 14 to 24 with that lens, apart from the fact that the aperture just isn't wide enough. You know, we're shooting at f2.8 when I shoot astrophotography, and f4 just isn't going to do what I need it to do. But for the vast majority of my other shots, I could definitely use that lens. That being said, let's talk about the lens a little bit more. So I went to a few different locations. As I mentioned, I went to Spain, so I shot some images in a little town called Toledo with the lens itself. So in this image, I managed to capture a really dramatic sunset, and it's a single JPEG. This is straight out of the camera JPEG, and Nikon were very strict about that. I couldn't manipulate the images or even add some contrast in post-processing later on. Everything had to be done in camera. And I did, at the end of the project, also have to submit some creative shots where I could post-process some of the images, but only with minimal post-processing. And where I've processed the image, I'm going to say in this video, so you can see what's straight out of the camera and what's processed. So this image is straight out of the camera. You can see it's a relatively high contrasting scene, but there's detail in the foreground as well as no overexposed highlights in the sky because I had active de-lighting in camera. I also had the good fortune of shooting off a fantastic building in Dubai and capturing a nice cityscape shot. And of course, I went down to my native Newcastle and shot the River Tyne as well. Now, in terms of the lens's capabilities, one of the things I loved about it was the general sharpness. It was an extremely sharp lens. So if we look at this image of a bridge in Madrid and we zoom in 100%, you can see the wire on the bridge is beautifully sharp. Now, the next image shot in Dubai, we can zoom in a couple of different areas, and I can zoom in 100%, or I can zoom in even more, and look at the fine detail in these windows. Now, I should say I don't usually look through people's windows when I'm taking photos. This is just a quick example. So overall, I found that the foreground and background objects were more than sharp enough for my final image. Now, I should point out that I used manual focus the entire time. I didn't use autofocus, so I can't talk about that. The next thing I loved about it was the distortion correction that happens in camera and with the lens as well. You know, you're shooting at 14mm like I am here, you expect there to be some barrel distortion along the edge of the image. But as you can see to the right and the left of the image, the lines are perfectly straight, and also down the bottom here on the ground. And here's another example which is showing that as well. If you look at the right of the image, that black metal line going down there is perfectly straight. All of this was done in camera and shot at 14mm, so we don't have to correct the distortion in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw afterwards. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is something that Nikon really emphasized when I was working with them, and that's something called light reproduction. And it's the ability, let's say you're shooting late at night like in this image, it's the ability to capture a light on the horizon in the corner of the image and have it replicated as a dot as it should be. Now, what that means is often when we do that, and this is shooting at really wide aperture, so f4, So what that means is when we do that, often in lenses, those dots aren't perfect dots. And anyone who's shot low light photography, be it astrophotography or cityscape photography, will know exactly what I mean here. The lights kind of elongate. They take on the shape of a little bird or something like that. And they often have some purple fringing around them. So I'm zooming into this image significantly so we can look at these dots. And as you can see, some of these dots are absolutely perfect. We can start to see a little bit of distortion in and around some of the ones in the furthest part of the image. But this is arguably the best performance I've ever seen from a lens, certainly better than the 14-24. And now Nikon claim that being able to reproduce dots of light will have a huge impact on the rest of the image in terms of sharpness and detail. And moving on to the next thing I really liked about this lens, we finally have an ultra wide angle lens where we can use a normal sized filter. So this is the filter holder, and these are the filters I use with my 14-24 f2.8. And this is roughly what I used for the Nikon lens, for the new Nikkor 14-30. Now, I think the thread size is 82mm, but I might be wrong there. But it was so convenient. I mean, I've had years where I've had to put the filter holder on and put these big glass filters in front of the lens, and it's just been awkward at the best of times. But having this simple screw-on filter made it so much easier, and I managed to capture some decent images in Dubai and also a decent seascape from Dunstanburgh on the Northumberland coastline. Another useful thing is the way that the lens handled flare. So when I was shooting directly into strong sources of light, there wasn't so much flare dotted around the frame. Now obviously, lens flare can be really attractive. Sometimes it isn't. So having a lens which controls that a little bit more will help you create a generally cleaner image. And I found that to be the case with this lens. And now one final stylistic thing that I liked was the spikes that we get when shooting again towards strong light sources. The 14-24 doesn't have very nice sun spikes or street light spikes, but the 14-30 did have a lot more attractive sun spikes or light spikes. Now for me, it's still not as attractive as Canon 16-35 f4, for example, but it's a big improvement because the 14-24 in that area is a bit of a mess. And before I forget, there's the obvious positive of this lens is that it's really small and light. Look at the size of this 14-24. It's an absolute beast. Whereas the 14-30 is tiny in comparison. Now, I'm afraid I don't have it with me because Nikon have taken it off me, sadly. But let's talk about a couple of the negatives. Firstly, it's really expensive. Now, I'm not sure why. There seems to be this myth that an f4 lens shouldn't be as expensive as this. But I don't think that's necessarily true. There's a lot that goes into a lens that defines its quality, not necessarily its aperture. So would I pay that amount of money for this lens? Yeah, I probably would actually, because I thought it was fantastic. And when you add that to the price that you pay for the Z7 body, it's an extortionate amount of money. But nevertheless, we'll probably pay it. Another criticism of the lens is the level of vignette that you get shooting at f4 compared to f8. Now, I haven't compared this with any other lens, so I can't tell you if it's better or worse, but I found it really noticeable in this lens. Another small criticism of the lens, which is more just an awkward thing rather than anything severe, was every time I wanted to put the ND filter on, I had to unscrew the lens hood, which was just a little bit awkward and affects your composition, so you have to recompose your shot when you do that. But that's not a particularly big problem, I think. So my final issue with the lens is that even though I said just before that, aperture shouldn't be the sole thing which determines the price of a lens, f4 is a little bit of a deal breaker for me, as I mentioned earlier in the video. I do shoot astrophotography, so I need a lens which has a really wide aperture like 2.8. So that means I couldn't get rid of my 14-24 f2.8, so I'd have to start carting around two separate lenses. So is it a complete replacement for the 14-24 2.8? No, it isn't. And the good news is apparently they're working on a brand new replacement and 14-24 f2.8 for mirrorless cameras. I don't know anything about it. I don't know about the size or the quality, but the very news of that lens does make me hesitate and make me wonder why you would actually purchase the 14-30 f4 lens if we know there's a 14-24 f2.8. But nevertheless, I thought that lens was great and I really loved the Z7 as well. So I hope that's been useful to you. Thank you very much for watching and I'll see you next time.